The person who has most changed the history of the world never wrote a book, never commanded an army, never traveled more than 200 kilometers from his hometown. And yet, 2,000 years later, 2 billion people carry his name. This is not a myth. This is a real man, in a real time, in a real place. And his story is more extraordinary and more human than you have probably been told. What nobody tells you is this: Jesus spent more than 30 years living an ordinary life before anyone outside his village knew his name. 3 decades of manual labor, family, synagogue, and Galilean dust. Those silent years built everything that came after. If this kind of content is useful to you, subscribe now. The button is right below the video. Nazareth, a village of 400 people in the hills of Galilee, with no political importance, no mention in the writings of the Old Testament. The place where Jesus spent 95% of his life. Luke summarizes it in a single phrase after the temple episode. At age 12, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature, and in favor with God and men. 30 years, compressed into 16 words. What was Jesus doing during those 30 years? The Gospel of Mark describes him as the tekton, the same word the Gospels use for his father Joseph. Not just carpenter, but construction craftsman in wood and stone. A man who knew the weight of beams, the edge of the chisel, the difference between well-cured wood and wood that will break under pressure. 6 kilometers from Nazareth stood Sepphoris, a Hellenized city completely rebuilt during Jesus' childhood and youth. Many historians believe Jesus and Joseph worked on that construction project. If so, Jesus knew the world of physical labor, fair wages, and daily effort from childhood. And those 30 years were not empty years. They were formative years. Every parable about foundations, every image about the sower, every reference to leaven that leavens the whole lump, comes from someone who knew those things with his hands, not just with his mind. The 30 years of silence are the foundation of everything that followed. Everything changes at the Jordan River. John the Baptist, the eccentric preacher who eats locusts and wild honey and wears camel's hair, was baptizing crowds in the Jordan when Jesus appears among the people and asks to be baptized. The scene is extraordinary for what it says and for what it doesn't say. John tries to dissuade him. "I need to be baptized by you," which implies that something already recognizable in Jesus existed before any public miracle. But Jesus insists, "Let it be so now, for it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." The voice from heaven, the dove, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." It is the moment of public commissioning. Jesus is approximately 30 years old. 3 decades of preparation for a ministry that will last, according to most historians, between 1 and 3 years. Immediately after the baptism comes the desert. 40 days, no food, with the adversary. The 3 temptations that follow are a microcosm of the entire ministry to come. The temptation of bread, which will later become the multiplication of the loaves. The temptation of power, anticipating the moment when the crowd will try to make him king. And the temptation of spectacle, prefiguring the moments when signs will be demanded. Jesus responds to all 3 with the same tool, the scripture he had memorized from childhood in the synagogue of Nazareth. There is something that separates Jesus' teaching from that of every teacher of his time and most teachers of all time. He did not teach with abstractions, he taught with things. A sower going out to sow, a woman who loses a coin and sweeps the whole house, a son who asks for his inheritance, wastes it, and comes home hungry, a father who runs down the road when he sees the sun from a distance, foundations on rock, foundations on sand, a net full of fish of every kind, a pearl of great price. These are not pedagogical illustrations chosen by a sermon writer. They are images from the physical world of first-century Galilee that Jesus knew from the inside. The sower who goes out with his seed bag and throws it on rocky ground, among thorns, and on good earth, is the farmer who lives 100 meters from the Nazareth synagogue. The woman who sweeps the dirt floor house, searching for the lost coin, knows the value of a denarius, when the week's budget depends on it. The Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' longest discourse in Matthew, is also the most subversive document of the first century. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. In the honor and shame system of the ancient Mediterranean world, where honor depended on power, wealth, and status, Jesus inverted every category. He did not teach what everyone expected to hear. He taught exactly the opposite, and the crowds followed him in the thousands. The miracles of Jesus are narrated in all four Gospels with a coherence and specificity that distinguishes them from miraculous accounts about other ancient figures. They are not vague or generic. They are concrete. The name of the person, the place, the time of day, the reaction of those present, the exact words Jesus spoke. But the most striking thing about Jesus' miracles is not their frequency. It is their language. For a first-century Jewish listener, each miracle was a quotation from the Hebrew Scriptures. Giving sight to the blind was exactly what Isaiah had prophesied of the Messiah. Healing lepers was restoring the excluded to community. Raising the dead was anticipating the final resurrection. The miracle of the multiplication of the loaves takes place in a deserted place, the same type of place where God fed Israel with manna in the wilderness. Jesus takes the bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and distributes it. The words and gestures are exactly those the Jewish liturgist would use at the Sabbath table. The listeners could not hear the resonance. The calming of the storm, Jesus asleep in the boat, the terrified disciples, the wind and waves responding to his voice. In Hebrew theology, only God has authority over the waters of chaos. The question the disciples ask, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" is not a rhetorical question. It is the central question of the entire gospel. On Sunday, Jesus enters Jerusalem on a donkey while the crowd spreads cloaks and branches on the road and shouts, "Hosanna!" This is not a spontaneous gesture or an accident. It is a deliberate and public quotation of the prophet Zechariah. "Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey." On Monday, he drives the money changers from the temple, overturns the tables, releases the doves, prevents anyone from carrying merchandise through the court. Quoting Isaiah and Jeremiah simultaneously, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves." The temple priests, whose economy depended precisely on that system of exchange and sales, understood perfectly what had just happened. From that Monday of Passover week, the decision to eliminate Jesus is made. Tuesday is the day of the great confrontations in the temple. The Pharisees come with a trap about tribute to Caesar. The Sadducees come with a philosophical trap about resurrection. The scribes ask, "Which is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus answers each group with a precision that leaves no possibility of reply, and ends with his own question about the Messiah that none of them can answer. At some point that Tuesday, Jesus sits near the temple treasury and watches people deposit their money. A widow drops in 2 small copper coins, less than a penny. Jesus calls his disciples and says, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had to live on." That is the last recorded public teaching of Jesus before the Passion. The last word is about a widow with 2 coins. Thursday is the most intimate day of the entire week. The Last Supper, the upper room, the washing of feet, the act that, in that culture, only the lowest slave of the house performed. Done by the master before his own people, with a towel around his waist and a basin of water. "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." It is not just a humble gesture. It is a complete redefinition of the meaning of power. Then he takes the bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and says, "This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." He takes the cup and says, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this, as often as you drink it, in remembrance of me." The disciples are celebrating the Passover Seder, the annual celebration of liberation from Egypt. And in that moment, the family dinner becomes something completely new. that 2 billion people will repeat every week for centuries to come. Then Gethsemane. Jesus separates Peter, James, and John from the rest and asks them to stay awake while he prays. Then he goes a little further and falls to his knees. The prayer that follows is the most extraordinary the Gospels record. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Luke the physician adds a clinical detail of striking specificity. His sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. That is not metaphor. That is a documented physiological condition called hematidrosis. He returns 3 times to the disciples. 3 times he finds them asleep. The solitude of Gethsemane is absolute. When Judas arrives with the cohort and the temple guards, the disciples flee. Peter follows from a distance to the high priest's courtyard, where he denies 3 times knowing him. The rooster crows. Peter weeps bitterly. Friday is the crucifixion. Trial before Annas, before Caiaphas, before the Sanhedrin, before Pilate, before Herod, back to Pilate. Pilate declares him innocent 3 times and condemns him anyway. The cowardice of power in the face of crowd pressure. The crown of thorns, the Roman flogging, the Via Dolorosa with the cross on his shoulders. Simon of Cyrene forced to carry it when Jesus can no longer. Golgotha, the place of the skull, outside the city walls. 2 criminals, 1 on each side. 7 words from the cross, recorded across all 4 Gospels like fragments of gold. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Woman, behold your son. My God, why have you forsaken me? I thirst. It is finished. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." The sun darkens. The temple veil tears from top to bottom. A Roman centurion, the officer who supervised the execution, says, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Joseph of Arimathea asks for the body. Nicodemus brings myrrh and aloes. The body is wrapped in linen and placed in a new tomb in a garden near the place of crucifixion. A large stone closes the entrance. The sun of that Friday sets. The Sabbath begins. On Sunday before dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other women go to the tomb to anoint the body. The stone has been rolled away. The tomb is empty. The linens are on the ground. The burial cloth that had covered his head is folded and put aside. Angels say what no one expected to hear. "He is not here, for he has risen," as he said. Peter runs into the tomb and sees the empty linens. Mary Magdalene remains outside weeping. She sees someone she assumes is the gardener. He asks, "Why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" She says, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." 1 word in reply, "Mary." And she recognizes the voice. The first person to see the risen Christ is a woman who in the 1st century had no right to testify in a Jewish court. What emerges from this journey through the life of Jesus is not the distant figure of a cathedral stained glass window. It is a man of flesh and blood who walked dirt roads, who was hungry and tired and had friends and enemies, who touched the untouchable, ate with the inadmissible, wept at his friend's tomb, and who also said things no sensible man would say if his only goal was to be popular. "I am the resurrection and the life. Before Abraham was, I am. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." C.S. Lewis framed the dilemma with a clarity that has never been surpassed. A man who says these things is either a lunatic, a liar, or exactly what he claims to be. There is no comfortable middle ground. There is no room for, "He was just a good moral teacher." The empty tomb doesn't prove the resurrection to someone who refuses to believe, but it can't be ignored by anyone who wants to be honest with history. Something the disciples saw, something changed them, and that something, 2,000 years later, remains the most important question any person can ask. See you in the next one.